Welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Darren E. Grimm. I'm an associate professor of history and Southern studies here at the University of Mississippi. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's South Talk, Dr. Matt O'Neill. He is assistant professor of history and Southern studies here at the University of Mississippi. He is a historian of race, labor, and migration, specifically in the Appalachian South. From Kentucky originally, he earned his PhD in history from the University of Georgia in 2023, where he completed his dissertation titled Home and Hell, the Great Migration and the Making of Sundown Towns in Appalachia. He is currently turning his dissertation into a book under contract with the University of North Carolina Press. Dr. O'Neill is also the author of 2 articles recently published in the Journal of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era and the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society. He's also been featured in a documentary produced by Black in Appalachia, as well as in public conversations on the local legacies of racial violence. Please join me in welcoming Professor O'Neill.
Thanks, Dr. Grimm, and thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. So my goal for today's talk is to explain a little bit. I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to explain, first of all, the creation of Appalachia as a region. How do we get to the point where we can look at a map, draw some lines around this place, and know something about it? How do we get that idea? When does it come about? And why does it come about when it does? So I'll talk about that first, just some kind of contextual background. Then I'll talk a little bit about my own research, how I try to complicate some of these ideas. And then I'll end with some sort of modern day implications for how we think about this kind of like corner of the American South, sort of what it means for us today. So if that sounds good to y'all, I'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start with this question. How do we know where Appalachia is? What is it? Who lives there? When do we get this idea first coming into being about this place that we can call Appalachia? Well, to answer that question, we got to go back to the post-Civil War America. Okay, so talking 1860s into the 1870s, and we're looking at the work of certain people that we would call today, or were called back then too, travel writers. Okay, travel writers, journalists, folks that worked for big newspapers and literary magazines, mostly in sort of the big cities of the North and the Midwest. Now, what they were doing in the 1860s and the 1870s was they were going around not just the United States, but the world, and looking for stories. Okay, looking for stories that their readers would consume, what their audience wanted to read about, what would sell newspapers, what was going to sell magazines. And increasingly, in the 1860s into the 1870s, these travel writers and these journalists start going to the Appalachian Mountains to find these stories. Okay? And they start describing this place. They start discovering it. Okay? This is a word that's going to come up several times today. They start discovering this place as they would describe it as a strange land inhabited by a peculiar people. Okay, now this particular phrase comes from one of these travel writers, William Wallace Harney, who wrote for Lippincott's magazine in the 1860s and the 1870s. He actually coined this phrase. So let's think about it for a second. Why would travel writers and journalists think of the Appalachian Mountains as a strange land? Okay, well, if you can look at this map that I've provided for you up here. This is a map of where the Appalachian Mountains are. Again, this is before we're actually calling it Appalachia. We're just talking about the mountains, okay? Well, the mountains themselves are really like in the backyard of some of the nation's biggest cities in the 1860s and the 1870s. You can think about what's happening in America at this time. We're becoming a modernizing, urbanizing, industrializing nation, right? Big cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, growing in population. Certainly the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., right there on the East Coast. And you just go, a few hundred miles, sometimes less than that, and all of a sudden you're in a very different kind of environment. You're in a very different type of terrain. Right? The Appalachian Mountains are rugged. They can isolate certain communities. So there's also a thought on behalf of some of these travel writers that there's something mysterious about this place. Now, first of all, it's ancient, right? 480 million years old by some estimations. So there's some thought on behalf of these travel writers that to go to Appalachia is to literally step back in time. I came across this quote recently that captures this idea that time in the Appalachian Mountains was measured not by the hour, but by the eon. So think about that for a second. This is a place that is somehow outside of history, doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of us. Okay, so the land itself is strange and it's mysterious. There's something alluring about it. Certainly it's beautiful. We know this, right? We still go to the Appalachian Mountains to partake in the beauty of it, but there's something kind of mysterious about it that keeps us thinking. Okay, so the land itself is strange in the writings of these journalists and these travel writers. But also they describe the people that inhabit this place as peculiar. Okay? That they live in these isolated pockets in the Appalachian Mountains. If the rest of the country is modern and industrial and urban, then people that live in the Appalachian Mountains are not that. Right? They are rural. They are isolated. Okay? They are not part of whatever else is going on in the rest of the country. Okay? There are all these examples of, again, travel writers, journalists, and later reformers that are part of this process too. We'll get to them in a second. Well, they start to discover all these things that make Appalachian people strange. Right? The accents are different. They don't speak the same way as the rest of the country. They use really weird words and phrases to describe certain things. Also, some of their cultural practices are different. For instance, some of these, again, reformers discover that in Appalachia, Christmas is celebrated not on December 25th, but on January 6th, the day now that we know of, the day of Epiphany. This was the old Julian calendar that actually set Christmas Day on January 6th. The British Empire adopted the Gregorian calendar in the 1750s, which set Christmas Day on the 25th of December. But in Appalachia, there were some folks who hadn't caught up to that yet. Right? They were still celebrating those old traditions. So all these examples of this place and the people being separate and different and apart from whatever else is going on in the rest of the country. Now, the concept that scholars have developed to describe this first wave of discovery, this first wave of writing about the Appalachian region and its people, and the discovery that continues to happen, is this idea that Henry Shapiro coined in the 70s. It's called Appalachian otherness. Okay, so this is very important to understand because everything that is said or written about Appalachia needs to be kind of put through this lens first. Okay, so Appalachian otherness. Let's tick through just a few important parts of it because it's going to inform the rest of what we're doing for today. So first thing, what does this idea hold? This idea of Appalachian otherness, this construction? Well, it says that the place and the people, they form a region. Okay, you can know it. You can draw a line around it and say, I know what these people are like and what the place is like. It's a discrete region. It's a real place. The place and the people form a region that is different from the rest of America. It is other. Whatever else is going on in the country, Appalachia is not part of it. Second part of this, okay? The people and their culture are homogeneous, meaning it's all the same, and their conditions are consistent. So wherever you go in the Appalachian region, whether it's southern West Virginia, northern Georgia, East Tennessee, you can expect the people to look like this, to talk like this, to be doing these things. Okay, this is an essentializing image that is being produced here, right? The people are all the same and the conditions are the same, no matter where you are in this region known as Appalachia. Now, people usually have one of two reactions when they encounter this sort of mythic production of Appalachia. Okay, it's usually one of two reactions. One is to be afraid of it, and the other is to sort of idolize it. So I break it down like this, either fear or fascination. And sometimes it's both at the same time, right? I mean, you can certainly be fascinated by something that you're afraid of, and vice versa. So fear and fascination sort of characterize people's reactions to encountering Appalachia for the first time. You can also think about it as scary hillbillies on the one hand, or noble, sort of quaint mountaineers on the other, right? I mean, again, this is a mythic depiction, so it can be malleable. Talk about that again in a second. The last implication of this is that Americans are constantly discovering Appalachia. Every generation of Americans, it seems, and it has been true so far, stumbles across this mountain region seemingly for the first time and sort of imports all of its ideas into it. We have all these arguments about Appalachia. Every generation of Americans does this over and over and over again. Okay? So, that's Appalachian otherness. Let's look at two examples from this late 19th century period, one on the fear side of this coin and the other on the fascination. Okay, and we'll see how they're kind of like working together. So, first, on the fear side. As the travel writers and the journalists are discovering this region in the late 19th century, again, there's a thought that these people are not part of what the rest of us are doing. They're outside of history. We have to civilize them. We have to bring Appalachia and the Appalachian people up into the modern age. Okay? An example of this, another journalist, right? T.C. Crawford, guy that writes for a New York publication, comes to the border of West Virginia and Kentucky in the late 1880s to chronicle the infamous Hatfield-McCoy feud. And in his book, American Vendetta, he describes Appalachia literally as murderland, okay? As a blood-stained wilderness, as remote as Central Africa. So think about what he's doing there, right? He's framing Appalachia as an exotic corner of America that's really kind of cut off from the more appealing parts of modern life. Okay? Here people exist like the Hatfields, right? They're dangerous. They're violent. They're pre-modern in some ways. The kinds of violence they engage in, the kinds of sort of cultural practices, right? They are outside of modern America. So the solution to this that starts to develop, and this is not like, it's not a conspiracy, right? But all these ideas kind of work together, okay? The solution that begins to be put forward is that we have to modernize the Appalachians, we have to civilize them, and the way we're going to do this is through industrial capitalism, right? Through big business. That the railroads and the coal mines and the timber companies will come in, develop the land, use the natural resources to power industrial America, and along the way we'll transform the Appalachian society into something modern, into something that makes sense to the rest of us, right? That through this process, they will truly join the rest of us in the national experiment. I mean, there's a thought that, like, you know, think about what's going on in the Gilded Age. We're building the Transcontinental Railroad. We're stitching the nation together in a national economy. And there's some people that look at the mountains and say, we kind of forgot about this, right? It's like an interior, like a backwater that we passed over. We have to go back and bring them up into civilization. Okay? So this is certainly the fear side of the coin, right? I mean, these are scary individuals that need to be reformed, need to be changed. And one solution to this is big business and industrial capitalism. Other part of this, okay, if that's the fear side of the coin, let's examine fascination for a second. Let's talk about reform movements that were sort of existing alongside all of these other attempts to discover Appalachia in the late 19th century. This is William Goodell Frost, who was the president of Berea College in the late 19th century into the 20th century. Now, Berea College, a little bit of background there. So it was founded in the 1850s, but really only started going in 1866. But as the South's first and only interracial coeducational college. Okay, so it's in the bluegrass region of Kentucky, kind of right on the border of the mountains. But their original mission was to educate the formerly enslaved. So they start during Reconstruction with this mission in mind. They would partner with organizations like the American Missionary Association and open up schools all across the Upper South, again, to educate the formerly enslaved. That's their original mission. But by the late 19th century, their mission had changed a little bit. Under Frost's leadership, they start moving away from this original goal of interracialism and more towards what they would call mountain white work. Okay, so away from trying to educate African Americans and more towards focusing on white people that live in the mountains. Why did this happen in the late 19th century? Well, you think about what else is going on, not just in the South, but in America in the late 19th century. We have abandoned Reconstruction by this point, by the 1890s, right? Reconstruction officially ends in 1877. And in the ensuing period, starting in like the 1890s, southern states had passed Jim Crow laws, had enshrined it into their state constitutions, this principle of separate but equal. And in 1898, the Supreme Court gives it a rubber stamp, right? Says that this is okay, right? So we have fully abandoned those kinds of principles of Reconstruction that Berea College was kind of an example of. And Berea College goes along with this. Okay, they don't challenge this abandonment of Reconstruction. They go along with it. Okay, that kind of explains their shift away from interracialism towards mountain white work. Here are people, these folks at Berea College say, that are worthy of reform. Right? These are our noble mountaineers, that they are quaint, they need our help, and they're worthy. Right? These are people that we should be spending our time and our energy pulling up into the modern era. So let's look at this speech that William Goodell Frost gives in 1899, in which he labels people that live in the Appalachian Mountains our contemporary ancestors. Think about that for a second. Right? Our contemporary ancestors. They're living with us, but at the same time, they're stuck in the past, right? So just a few selections from this. He's describing how remote the landscape is in the mountains, but he also says, the remoteness is no means measured by the mere distance in miles. It is a longer journey from northern Ohio to eastern Kentucky than from America to Europe. For one day's ride brings us into the 18th century. To go into Appalachia literally is to go back into the past, to step outside of history. So that's sort of the people and the place he's describing. But Frost is also important because he's really the first person to put his stamp on it and call this place Appalachia. So he calls the mountains one of God's grand divisions, and in absence of any other name that anyone else has labeled it, we're going to call it Appalachia. Okay? So by the turn of the 20th century, this idea is firmly in place. Go back to otherness, right? That the place and the people form a region. It's coherent. It's all the same. Okay? It's unchanging in a way. And we have this two-sided reaction to it, fear and fascination, sometimes both at the same time. Now, while this mythic image that is being produced is malleable, right? You can either be a scary hillbilly or a quaint mountaineer. One thing that is consistent throughout all of this is the racial identification of people that live in Appalachia. Whether you're scary or you're quaint, you're always white in this formation of the Appalachian region. Okay, that is the one thing that is consistent about this construction. So that's a little bit of how we get the idea of Appalachia, how we get this idea of the region. Now let's step outside of the myths for just a second, okay, and the stereotypes that we're so familiar with, and ask a different question. Who actually made Appalachia? Okay? If there was a vision to modernize the mountains and to incorporate it into the industrial economy, who did it? Who actually made it happen? Well, if you were a travel writer or a journalist in, say, 1910, and you went to a coal camp in southern West Virginia, or if, in 1920, you went to a railroad town in Harlan County, okay, a mountaineer was just as likely to be black or an immigrant from Southern or Eastern Europe, as they were to be a quote-unquote quaint mountaineer. Just like the rest of industrial America, Appalachia was built by a multiracial, multi-ethnic working class. Okay? This is an example of it truly being part of what the rest of us are doing. Appalachia is not different in this respect. Okay? Black men and women, again, immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, worked on the railroads, worked in the coal mines, worked in the timber camps to fully integrate Appalachia into this modern industrial economy. That's who actually made Appalachia, right? So this is part of what I try to do in my research. Okay, this is what my dissertation was based on, what I'm trying to turn into a book. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is to think about the Great Migration as part of how this all happens. Okay, part of how Appalachia is, again, developed as part of like an internal periphery in some ways of the modern industrial economy, but also who's doing it and where they end up. Okay, so the Great Migration is part of this. Now, we think about the Great Migration, for those of us that aren't familiar with it, this is the mass movement of some, I believe it's 6 million is the estimate, African Americans from the South to the North and the West from about 1910 to 1970. So a mass movement of African Americans up out of the South over a period of 6 decades. Totally transformed the entire country in all these different ways, right? We often think about it as a south to north journey, right? But what I try to do in the book is not just talk about a single Great Migration, but millions of different migration journeys that make up the whole. So it's not just one Great Migration, it's actually all of these different Great Migrations that contribute to the whole part. Okay, so a typical Great Migration story, which again is factual, true, we know this happened, but let's think about it in sort of how we can complicate it in some ways. This is the Arthur family. The Arthur family migrated to Chicago, Illinois in 1920 from Texas. We now know that they left Texas fleeing racial violence and ended up in Chicago in 1920 when this picture was taken. And this picture gets used all the time to talk about the Great Migration, right? And Chicago certainly was a prime destination, particularly for folks from Mississippi, certainly. But let's think about a different Great Migration journey. So this is the Arthur family from Texas to Chicago. What about this individual right here? This guy that has arrived in Harlan County, Kentucky, to work for the coal mines. He too is a part of this Great Migration story, right? So, particularly over this first phase of the Great Migration, which historians date to 1915 to about 1940, so like World War I, right to the eve of World War II. Tens of thousands of black Southerners moved to Appalachia. Okay, so the Great Migration is not just a south to north story, it is a rural to urban story. Okay, it's a rural to industrial story. Oftentimes migration journeys were complicated. Okay, first it would be, say, from a cotton plantation to Birmingham, and from Birmingham to Harlan County, and then from Harlan County sometimes to Detroit, or sometimes back to Alabama. But all of these different migration journeys make up the whole. Okay? So let's think for a second too about why was Appalachia an attractive destination? Why in the world would someone want to come to the mountains? Again, knowing like they knew everything that we did and still know about it, all the stereotypes, all those kinds of things. Why was Appalachia thought of as a great migration destination? Well, a few reasons. One is, I guess, purely economic. Okay, so there were good paying jobs in the Appalachian mountains. Okay, you can think about the first event that really kicks off the Great Migration, and that's World War I, which essentially cuts off immigration from Europe, but is also a huge stimulus to American industry. So all these companies need labor. And what they do is they dispatch labor agents all through the South carrying cards that look like this. So coal miners wanted, right, for the Pond Creek Coal Company in Stone Creek, Kentucky. Pay every 2 weeks, so the pay is solid. There's no labor trouble. They weren't always telling the truth about these things, right? But the point is this. I mean, every southern city was inundated with these labor agents. So this is Bessemer, right? So it's right outside of Birmingham. A bunch of steel mills, coal mines, all that industrial activity. The labor agents are swarming around the Birmingham area handing out these cards. And you could make good money as a coal miner or on the railroads in Appalachia, certainly more than you could as a sharecropper, but even the wages as a coal miner were higher in a place like West Virginia or Eastern Kentucky than they were in Alabama for all kinds of reasons. But it wasn't just economic, right? Maybe it's best to focus on this letter that I found in the Department of Justice records. There was an investigation of these labor agents by the Department of Justice because President Woodrow Wilson thought the Republicans were going to steal the election by having all of these black southern migrants move up into these northern and midwestern states. So that's why they started an investigation. But anyway, one of the letters that comes out of this investigation comes from a guy who had grown up in Alabama and had moved to West Virginia to work as a coal miner. And he writes a letter back to his friend who was still living in Alabama, trying to convince him to come up to West Virginia to work. And he outlines all these different reasons why life is better up there for him. One is, he says the pay is pretty good, steady. The company house is not great, but steady pay. He describes the environment a little bit. He says the weather's a little cold, but the mountains are beautiful. He says there's mountains everywhere. They're like ringing the coal company town in which he lives. Then he also says, that presidential election that's coming up in a few days, I'm going to vote in it. So how about that? The specific quote that he says is, a black man stands just as good as a white man here. So this is also part of it too. That the Appalachian Mountains were not just a place to make a good living, they were also a place to make good on some of these promises that the Jim Crow South had denied African Americans for decades. It's a fact that in West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee, black people could vote and did, and exercised this political power in all sorts of ways. Okay, so for these reasons, it was attractive. Not everybody stayed forever. And in some ways, we can think about this as like a stop along the Great Migration, that it was attractive for all of these reasons. Now, this is not to say that it was perfect, right? No place in America was or is, right? And this is also part of the book that's in the title, which is thinking about Appalachia as home and hell, really at the same time, right? That it, just like the rest of the country, offered these two possibilities. There's nothing about it that made it special or different or idyllic. That would be buying into the myths, if we think about that, right? Or there's nothing about it that made it uniquely terrible and awful and a bad place to be. It was both at the same time. Okay? So during the Great Migration, there are certain communities of white residents that expel these migrants that are coming up from the South, and they cement their place in the Appalachian South as what we would call today a sundown town, which is a place that is all white on purpose. So whether it's Erwin, Tennessee, Corbin, Kentucky, Ravenna, Kentucky, these things happen in the midst of the Great Migration. We know, we can sort of put them in context. They haven't always been that way. They emerged in this period for specific reasons. Okay? So, all right. But again, it's not either or, it's both at the same time. And if we can think about it in this way, to get back to sort of the theme of the talk, is that black and white Appalachia are being made at the same time. And I have this map up here that I want you to look at for just a second. Okay? It requires some active looking for your part. So this is a map that is based on the census in 1880, and then I'm going to zoom forward to 1940. Okay, so I'll do this a couple times, and I want you to notice some differences. So the darker the red or the darker the orange, the higher percentage of that particular county was black in 1880 and in 1940. Okay, so this is the map in 1880. Just to kind of orient ourselves, we're like in the upper South, all right? We got Kentucky here, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. Is this us here? Or are we over here? I think that's Lafayette right there. Anyway, so here's 1880. So notice the map now, and I'll zoom forward to 1940, which is again at the end of this first phase of the Great Migration. So 1940, back to 1880, 1940, one more time, 1880, 1940. Okay, certain places on this map have gotten whiter, but some places have not, right? You look at McDowell County, West Virginia, just some figures for you. In 1880, it was 0.1% black. 1940, 25% African American. Harlan County, 2% black in 1880, 10% black in 1940. Okay? So this reflects that Great Migration story, certainly, right? That a sort of stop along the Great Migration, Black Appalachia is being made by the people who are making these journeys. At the same time that a white Appalachia is also being made in places like Corbin or Irwin, Tennessee. So, for a generation, Black Americans lived, they worked, and they were laid to rest in the Appalachian Mountains. They lived their whole lives there, left a legacy that some of them still return to. Starting in the post-war period, after World War II, they also started to leave, just like the rest of Appalachians did. Okay? Starting in about the 1950s, coal mines start to shutter, jobs start to disappear, as really we see like the beginnings of the Rust Belt start to emerge first in Appalachia. There's a sense that there's a writer that calls Appalachia 1963 yesterday's people. But in a way, what's happening in Appalachia is like foretelling what's going to happen to Detroit. So in a way, they're tomorrow's people. You can think about them like that. But people start to leave Appalachia, go on to places like Cincinnati, Cleveland, Chicago, some back further south. Now the irony of this is that it is at this exact moment where the region is deindustrializing, losing a lot of that dynamic population that it had had for several decades. It's at this exact moment that Americans rediscover it again. And this time it's through the lens of poverty. So in the 1960s, whether it's through John F. Kennedy's Poverty Tour, 1963, or whether it's Lyndon Johnson literally launching the war on poverty on Tom Fletcher's porch in Martin County, Kentucky, these are the images that Americans associate with Appalachia, starting in the 1960s. That this is the place where poor white people live. And this place is a problem, again, that we need to solve. This is a map of the Appalachian region. Again, if the attempt is always to say where it is and what it looks like, this is what the Appalachian Regional Commission produced in the 1960s, basically saying that here's where, again, poor white counties are that are in need of our assistance. It's also a few years after this map. This is what the map looks like today, because I believe it's 66 or 67, 24 counties in northeast Mississippi get added, relatively controversially, into the Appalachian Regional Commission, right? So if we look here, northeast Mississippi counties there, not our county, of course, not Lafayette County. We are the nice blue hole right in the middle of this map down there. So, you know, but the next time you drive to, say, Pontotoc County, you can look, and it's not that you're so much in Appalachia as you are on it. Because Mississippi Highway 6 or US 278 is one of these roads that got built up and funded through Appalachian Regional Commission funds. So look out for that the next time you go through there. We too have had our own discovery of the Appalachian region. If every generation does this, right, we certainly have done it as well. So I'll put up a selection of text for you, and let's read it. Be thinking about this through the lens of Appalachian otherness, right, and that original creation of it in the late 19th century. So, I'll read it to you. The Scots-Irish are one of the most distinctive subgroups in America. As one observer noted, quote, "In traveling across America, the Scots-Irish have consistently blown my mind as far and away the most persistent and unchanging regional subculture in the country. Their family structures, religion and politics, and social lives all remain unchanged compared to the wholesale abandonment of tradition that's occurred nearly everywhere else." So again, your alarm bells should be going off, right? Unchanged, separate, apart, different, other than the rest of the country. The other part of this, of course, too, is the landscape. So if ethnicity is one side of the coin, then geography is the other, right? The land and the people, always fundamental to this idea. That when the first wave of Scots-Irish immigrants arrived, they really liked the Appalachian Mountains, and that's where they've stayed forever, right? So here we have all the core ideas still in place. What's this from? Well, it's from J.D. Vance's autobiography, Hillbilly Elegy, that came out in 2016. Okay? So again, all the ideas are right there, still with us in 2016. Now, Vance's memoir, of course, became a bestseller, and it was really in the wake of President Donald Trump's first election that liberals and conservatives alike flocked to this book as an explainer. How did this happen? This phrase that was sort of developed in the aftermath as Trump's America. How did we get this idea? People rushed to this book for an explanation. And in the book, of course, Vance recounts his childhood, mostly growing up in Middletown, Ohio, stop along Appalachian migration, okay? And also visiting his grandparents' house in Breathitt County, Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky. Vance tells us about his family's struggles with alcohol and drug abuse. He tells about how his friends and his coworkers had trouble holding down a good, steady-paying job, couldn't pull themselves, up by their own bootstraps out of poverty. And Vance attributes all of this to something he calls hillbilly culture. Hillbilly culture that echoes that idea of Appalachian otherness that was given to us in the late 19th century. Okay, so these ideas that Vance is sort of building on, they've sounded pretty good to many of America's wealthy and powerful elite. Vance, as we know, is now the vice president, and he's the leader, one of the leaders of something that people are calling the post-liberal right or the new right. Okay? But the point is this, his own personal experiences are one thing, right? But the reason why his story resonated with us and why it continues to be a bestseller, right? It popped up on the bestseller list again on Amazon after he became vice president. Netflix made it into a movie directed by Ron Howard. Okay? The reason why it resonates with us and why people flock to it is because it's drawing on ready-made myths that have been with us since the late 19th century. If the book was titled Midwestern Elegy, it would not have hit the same, right? So that's what he's doing there. He's tapping into that. Okay, and this is our own discovery that we've had in our current time that we're still dealing with. All right, so I'll wrap up here. 150 years later, after the birth of this idea, we are still thinking about the Appalachian South in terms of the myth, even with ample evidence to the contrary. So I'll leave you just with one more, okay? Let's think about the Eastern Kentucky Social Club for a second. Eastern Kentucky Social Club was founded in Cleveland, Ohio in 1969 by a group of black migrants from Harlan County. They had lived in Harlan County. They were coal miners. Coal mines shut down. They moved up to Cleveland. They formed this social club as a way to just fellowship, keep community ties, get together every now and then, right? And really kind of keep that Appalachian tie alive and vibrant, okay? The social club still meets every single year. One time in a big city somewhere across the country, usually one of these migration destinations, I think this year's meeting might be in Cleveland. And then another meeting is back in Harlan County at the old black school in Lynch, Kentucky. And they've taken the old school and they've turned the basement of it into a combination between a fellowship hall and a bar, which is kind of like the best of both worlds, right? And that's where they meet every year on Memorial Day weekend for a reunion. Okay? And outside the old black school, there is a memorial to the memory of the black coal miner. When I was there this summer, I was talking with older black residents who really bristled at this idea that to be Appalachian means that you are a poor, drug-addled, toothless hillbilly, right? That they were proud of their mountain roots. They were proud that they had, worked in the coal mines, or their husbands had worked in the coal mines. They were proud to be from Kentucky. And they are part of this story too. Right? I talked to another woman recently who said that it feels like her entire life that black Appalachians have been written out of this story. So they are a part of this history. Okay? Undeniably, they complicate what we think about what Appalachia is or who counts as an Appalachian, but they must be part of it. So I'll leave you with this. By recognizing the ongoing production of myths about the Mountain South that still entrap us, hopefully we can think outside of them and think about other things that are more important, like who benefits from these myths and what systems keep them in place. That's all I got for you. Thank you.
How do you see your book or upcoming book lying in conversation with Corita Brown's Gone Home?
Yes.
Which is, of course, about black coal miners in Appalachia from a descendant of black coal miners.
Absolutely. Yeah. First of all, that book, I keep it on my desk because I read it so much, and I hope to kind of emulate what she did, at least with her writing. So it's been very influential to me. What I'm doing with respect to her is I think I'm trying to put these two stories together, because the title of her book is Gone Home, right? And so she's looking at Appalachia as a stop on the Great Migration and as a place that even though people have left, they still consider it home, right? So what I think I'm trying to do is bring in the other element to this, that it wasn't all, you want to call it positive, or it wasn't all just like this community building, but it was also the other stuff too. It was the appearance of sundown towns at the same time. I think that's really what struck me was knowing that, Lynch, Kentucky, that she writes about, was first established in 1917 during World War I. And 2 years later, the town that my grandparents are from, Corbin, Kentucky, becomes a sundown town. So I'm like, wait a minute. These are two very different pictures that I'm getting here. And I think for me, it's about putting them together and trying to make sense of them in conversation with each other. So I hope I'm building on what she's done. So thank you. Yes?
Talk a little bit more about the book that she mentioned, but also documentary forms, kind of talking back to this sort of cultural stereotype that, hillbilly elegy and Night Comes to the Cumberland,
sure,
kind of promoting.
Yeah, that's always, again, it's a frustrating thing, I think, for me to just learn about and then now to be a part of. It just seems like it's a cycle that we've seen other generations of Appalachian scholars try to do the same thing, right? Something comes out, in the 1990s, there was a play called The Kentucky Cycle that was super popular and sort of trafficked in all of these stereotypes and tropes. There was an edited collection that pushed back against it, and then nothing really changed, So I see myself as part of that effort, but I'm just frustrated, which is, it seems like we just can't bust out of this cycle where every generation discovers it, people push back, and we end up right back to where we started with just the myths left about it. And I don't really have a good answer for you right now as to why that is, but I hope that we keep working on it, right? And I think I view myself as part of that. So thank you. Yes?
Why was our part of Mississippi sort of belatedly put into Appalachia? And why was Lafayette County not included? Do you have any idea about that?
So there's a great article that was published in Southern Cultures by a guy, Justin Randolph, who teaches somewhere in Texas, so I can send you that. But basically what he argues is that this was a way for Mississippi's politicians to kind of get their hands on some of that Great Society money. And if you look at the like racial demographics of that part of Mississippi, it's a lot wider than, say, the Delta, right? And so if the goal was to kind of control where the money was going and to put it into projects that, someone like Jamie Whitten, whose district gets included and ended up being a huge proponent of the Appalachian Regional Commission. He argues that the funds should be spent here, and Northeast Mississippi is part of Appalachia because they think like other Appalachians. They don't think like those people in the Delta. That's literally a quote from congressional testimony. And they also, part of what makes that Southern Cultures article so great is he uncovered a Rand McNally map that was used as evidence in one of these congressional meetings. Like, okay, why are we going to include Mississippi? There's no mountains there, right? Somebody, a local politician that they were working with, takes the atlas and extends the Appalachian Mountains, draws mountains on the map into Northeast Mississippi and says, look, there are mountains here. And so that makes it count as Appalachia. So it's a little bit about the geography that's a fiction, but then an argument about like the people that live here have different kinds of problems, right? Because they look different and they think differently, right? And I don't know why Lafayette County was not included. I have guesses. I mean, there were some counties like, say, in Virginia as well that are in the Shenandoah Valley that for every other definition count as Appalachian, but their congressman didn't want to have that label of Appalachian because that comes with all of those other things with it, right? You're poor, you're white, you're in need of assistance. So I think that might have been part of it. I'm still curious about that. I know that there's probably an answer somewhere, like in the testimony, but I think that's maybe part of it. So, other questions? Yeah, dear.
So when I'm teaching students about Southernness, I ask is given all of the kind of baggage that comes along, negative stereotypes and so forth that can be with Southernness writ large, why would anybody want to be Southern? So why would folks say buy into hillbilliness in the same way? And to what extent should we all just blame Nashville for that?
Well, okay, so why would folks want to claim being a hillbilly? Well, I think part of it is there's a certain, I guess, sort of pride in a shared, like, working class background in this that stretches across racial and ethnic lines too. One of the things that I like teaching students about, just exposing people to, is the way that the word redneck, which is different than hillbilly, but kind of doing the same kind of work. The word redneck was sort of taken and twisted into a positive by coal miners that were in southern West Virginia, say, and eastern Kentucky too, in the 20s and 30s. So the coal operators would say, if you're part of the union, then you're a radical, right? You're a red. Okay, that connotation with that connection to communism. So they took that and they were like, okay, yeah, we're all rednecks, and sort of adopted the red bandana as a way to reclaim that term and to twist it into something that's very different, right? And this, again, stretches across racial and ethnic lines. So I think that there's sort of a bottom-up way that people try to like reclaim that. Again, it can go lots of different ways, right? Hillbilly and redneck can be used in all different kinds of ways, I guess. But yeah, I think that's part of the appeal, is that there is a certain resistance in that term if you're taking it and you're twisting it and using it as sort of a coalition building type thing. Yeah. Other questions? Yes? Yeah.
Great talk.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. We're familiar with the problem of mountains in general, and mountain people in particular, in southern Europe in the 1960s and 70s. This becomes a kind of problem, question, discourses around regional development in the European Union and so on. So I wondered if you could kind of put this into comparative context, either with a case, another case within the United States, say the Rockies, or elsewhere across the West.
Yeah, wow. we should talk more about that. I mean, I know other folks have certainly have done that. There's been lots of work done on, say, comparing the particular coal mining regions of Appalachia with those, say, in Wales, or even with parts of like Eastern Europe, like Ukraine, and things like that. And so oftentimes you do see kind of a similar process of, these people, live in the backwoods and they need to be civilized, and we know the answer, right? But also I'm thinking of, gosh, it's sending me back to grad school now, Fernand Braudel's The Mediterranean. One of those volumes talks about the people in that particular part of the Mediterranean that they kind of looked at the hill people as weird and different, right? That their environment was different, but also they had different cultural practices and thought about time differently. So I think that was in like volume 2 or something like that. But yeah, and again, like you see some of the same kind of arguments being used, like late 19th century stuff. Like, I'm not equating the two situations by any means, but like, what was the whole goal of like Manifest Destiny, right? I mean, it was to civilize, it was to modernize, right? And that's where I think Appalachia kind of fits into that, because it's like these people should have already been part of that, right? First of all, they're white, right? At least in the conception of it, and they're not on the cutting edge, like they're sort of left behind by that. So I think, and again, people have done those kinds of comparisons, but I think it's definitely worth thinking about something bigger, like what can we draw out that can apply outside of this one place. So thank you for that. Yes, Jimmy?
You talk about otherness.
Yeah.
And otherness can be applied in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
So far what I've heard from you is that the Appalachians have been othered.
Yeah.
So what about the perspective of people who live in Appalachia othering people from outside the region? What were their thoughts on folks outside of Appalachia?
Yeah. So there's sort of a power dynamic at play here, right? Like, to say that someone is the other implies that you have the ability to do so, right? You're kind of controlling the language that is being used, and by extension, like the politics, and sort of there's a class dynamic there as well. And so from the inside, kind of like looking out, it kind of works in a similar way. But like, again, if someone from Appalachia were to say, well, like, someone from, I don't know, New York, you're the other, it would be kind of like, I think it's like a way to kind of use that language, but it doesn't quite work the same because the power dynamic is different, right? And so that's why I think I'm kind of getting at what you're saying. I mean, there is sort of a resistance to being labeled in that way on the behalf of people that live in Appalachia. I mean, they resent being called these things and all of that. But there is still, I think to this day, a power dynamic there where it doesn't quite go the other way, right? Like, there's not the same ability to do the same thing to New York or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. as happens in Appalachia. If that makes sense. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.